If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue the Law by Night How to Vampire series, a mini-series that aims to improve the role-playing of players and storytellers during tabletop sessions. This episode will focus on portraying the titles of the Sabbat. The near-ancient enemies of the Camarilla are not easy to roleplay as a player and a storyteller. Their ideologies and beliefs are so adjacent to the humane ones associated with the Anarchs and the Camarilla that the Sword of Cain might as well be aliens. It is easy to brand them as a less corporate Camarilla and more a disorganized Anarch, and whilst there is nothing wrong with doing this, providing all players are enjoying themselves, I believe neither of these describes the Sabbat all that well. I do not believe they are just monsters, which I think is the most common attitude portraying them. The Sabbat are savages, yes, but one is not born a monster. Their humanity is knocked down a fair amount as they embrace their inner beast. These are the fundamental differences the Sabbat has with the other two sects. As such, the chances for deeper and more harrowing roleplay can be found when playing a mature Sabbat game. I am of the mindset that if you play a Sabbat Chronicle, the player should start on humanity and work their way down to become more fucked up individuals. After all, most of the sect consists of neonates. Of course, there are many ways of portraying these roles and setting, as well as just the average Sabbat members. However, you are not here for just anyone's opinion, you came here for mine, and that is what I intend to deliver, in the hope of that some of what I am saying will be able to enhance your sessions. All thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I've said, that is totally fine. It does not mean that you are right and I am wrong, and vice versa. I will begin by repeating things I've said in the previous episodes of this series, which are how to make awesome and believable characters for creating the core characters concept, as well as how to portray elders, which may or may not help you with the individual roles such as Archbishop, Bishop, etc, etc. I suggest you listen to those before you carry on listening to this episode if you haven't done so already. It is also worth listening to my podcast episode about the Sword of Cain, as that will give you all that you need to know about the origins and a basic breakdown of the different roles found within the sect. For this How to Vampire episode, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the one that I did with the Camarilla. If you don't know what I mean, go and listen to that episode as well. As I am pushing this episode in the direction of turning a human into Sabbat monsters, I will be doing just that. To make things really difficult for myself, let us choose a police officer called Bill because fuck imaginative forenames. He was ganged up by a Sabbat pack in a pub. They drugged him up to his tits before carrying him away to some cemetery grave to partake in some ritual after being embraced by a gangrel. Before we think about that, however, there are lots of questions that should be answered. Why was he drinking to that pub? Was he drinking at that pub? Was it a crime he was investigating? Or not? What sort of police officer is he? Loyal or bent? I will say Bill was a loyal cop, drinking after a hard day's work and just so happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. He probably has a wife and kid just for added melancholy. Jokes aside, this sets his base humanity, alongside any other backstory dribble you wish to add. It sets the tone of what Bill the gangrel anti-tribu will find acceptable. With the aforementioned ritual, Bill will already lose some of that humanity. The ones meant for the embrace, called shovelheads, are traditionally thrown into a great pit together, fighting against each other, eating and tearing each other apart as you frenzy. You murder in order to survive, so that gruesome survival instinct has been taught to your character. If you refer to your humanity charts in VTM books, that knocks you down to 5, so one would have to perform the standard humanity rolls. On the surface and out of this pit, this Sabbat pack will get you to submit to your vampiric instincts, getting you to feed on some poor unfortunate captured soul. If you refuse, I would have the pack pick and bully the character for the purpose of getting them to frenzy, tapping into the instinct that way. Frenzy is not caused by just hunger and fire. Either way, you are eating that mortal and lose some more of that humanity. Bill the police officer is going to have to ration out all of this and pray these lunatics don't know his family. He is hungry, his senses are hyper keen, probably has some beastly features due to the gangrel weakness, and is just shoved about being told very little about what he is. And the Sabbat will not have the patience to sit you down and go through all the ins and outs. Bill will have to read in between the lines or die as you are made to kill some Camarilla schmucks who is trying to pop caps in your ass. Again, Bill is probably going to be confused with what is going on, and some someone in this pack that he's been forced in will probably frenzy, as they are overwhelmed with fear. He would have been shot in the face and the chest and will not die. He is terrified of fire now and probably got staked, which paralysed him, not killing him. But hey, he helped get the job done by providing some good, meaningful distraction. Once he has performed the task, he becomes true Sabbat and can exist within the sect and is no longer the same pleasant officer he once was. He has murdered by choice. He murdered to survive and God knows what else. It is highly unlikely he will return to his family now, aware that they are just food. Maybe he will return to see if he can escape the pack, only to devour them because the beast can't cope with the sudden rush of emotion. Perhaps the idea was planted into Bill's head to prove the point that the Sabbat is his family now. They won't die, and they are the only ones that can understand what Bill is going through. It is 50 shades of fucked up gaslighting, but that is the Sabbat in a nutshell. A manipulative vampire cult. An experienced ST would pepper in different paths of enlightenment ethics into the Sabbat doctrines here to further degrade the humanity of the K-Knight. With a sect full of super violent vampires with packs that can have up to 10 vampires, how does one control them all? Well, the infamous vinculum, of course, which is a ceremonial mutual blood bounding. Each vampire pours their own blood into a cup, chalice or whatever, and each drink from it. I won't go into the game mechanics of it too much, but it essentially decides how willing you are to die for another member of the pack, with a 10 on your D10 being you would sacrifice yourself to save them, to 1 being the vinculum not really working on you for that person. The leader would obviously donate the most amount of blood, and no one else should match or exceed it. This, and all other rituals within the Sabbat, binds loyalty to all of its participants. It also prevents others from bonding with you ever again, a little factoid that is often overlooked. Despite this, conflicts are common, and whilst you are entitled to freedom, you are also entitled to have your head caved in if you fuck up. The ritual of might makes right is a legitimate ritual in the sect, and it applies to both sides. One cannot just call out the Ductors for being a total tool and not expect punishment. There are proper channels to do so, and that is via the pack priest. Why is this permission needed? Chaotic they may be, but stupid they are not. One pack would be made to watch another, so they can truly see the inevitable outcome, which is death. Some rules are needed to maintain some order to live the lives they want to live. Blood rituals and fights are not the only way pack bonds. There are many rites that storytellers can choose for the players to go through, with the possibility of coming up with your own. Sabbat games can be pretty morbid, so it can be fun to unwind by robbing a bank in police uniform, only allowed to use guns and no disciplines. Not only is it an enjoyable exercise, but it naturally builds trust and bonds between pack members, in addition to better equip the character and, by extension the player, how to better react in those situations when they are causing trouble. The Sabbat disregard the traditions for the most part, but they are by no means stupid, which I have already said. They uphold some semblance of the Masquerade, and they control their domains very differently. Fear and blackmail is far more their style, rather than the smokes and shadow secrecy that is the Camarilla. The Masquerade is a tool of warfare, not a way of being. These naturally occurring Sabbat packs are known as covens. With the shovelheads now true Sabbat, at some point one of your superiors would ask the pack which one of you wants to step up and lead. That is the Ductus, which essentially boils down to a knighted gang leader. They deal with the direction of physical conflict within and outside the pack, by which I mean against the enemy, and more night-to-night things like where to feed, rest, etc, etc. This is not the equivalent of a prince, just a coterie leader, to use a Camarilla reference for a moment. The character is too young for too much responsibility, but you are worthy of something. The Ductus can be challenged on things quite easily. The conflict is often encouraged in Sabbat games. They are not weak per se, but the title is more honorific and diplomatic. Internal policies aside, everyone in the pack would defend the Ductus, unless they have lost the plot. Templars and Paladins are aggressive roles chosen by the Bishop, and very similar to each other but with a slight difference. Templars are essentially assassin gladiators, and Paladins are gladiators that defend important bodies. They are violence incarnate. Templars tend to hunt nomad packs, which are the stereotypical Sabbat monsters. They are the frontline fighters, the nomads I mean. With the muscle sorted, we move on to the pack priest, who educates the pack on the spiritual doctrines, the rites and rituals, and the path of enlightenment. They have to be calmer and collected than the rest, able to have a better leash on the beast, adhering to the spiritual well-being of the pack also. As pleasant as this may sound on the surface, what they really are doing is making you feel it is okay to kill and eat everything and maintaining that adrenaline high. If they can't do that, the Ductus will simply replace them. They don't have much say out of this. The bishops, however, serve the archbishop as an advisory role in the occult, industry, and so forth. There can be multiple bishops to encompass all these roles, or they can just be one. Archbishops are, of course, the Sabbat equivalent to a prince, who is part spiritual leader and part war veteran. Priscus are similar to the primogens of the Camarilla, only it is not something they are elected for, acting as a board of directors for the regent who are like the inner circle but with no one to keep them in check and none of the aristocracy. Tyranny is more potent here. So you now have an expanded law-by-night description of the Sabbat and most of their roles, the ones I deem most common at least. You have been educated a bit more on how one becomes a shovelhead to true Sabbat, and you have been given enough context to know how the general titles differ. But how do you put your own spin on these things? I ask that because the richness of this game comes from investing time into your character, their goals, and how they will fuck with the opposition just by existing. I address this in my How to Make Awesome and Believable Characters episode, and every character creation tutorial I've ever done, because you should be asking yourself every possible question to not only make them fit into your chronicle, but to make them a believable person. Don't think about the dots on the character sheet as just dots and expressions of their powers. They are extensions of the character. A good ST will look at your sheet and know what sort of person they are and whether they match up with whatever concept you have given them. But what about the STs themselves? How does one make those Sabbat titles more interesting in your games? As I said in my How to Make Awesome and Believable Characters episode, why not change things up a little bit? Yes, many of the canonical archbishops usually are La Sombra, but only a small portion of the world has been covered by the official books. Even so, you don't have to adhere to that. Sure, you can use your knowledge on the clan lore to help you define a character for a given title, but don't solely think about the clans and their powers, the crunch so to speak. They do not speak to who and what the person is. If anything I have told you in this episode has disturbed you or made you feel uncomfortable, I apologise. If you do not like any of the Sabbat-based atrocities, then do not play or run a VTM game that involves the Sabbat. I mentioned it before, but I will say it again. It is the religious push of the rituals that make the Sabbat. They are extremist zealots who are on the religious crusade to prevent the end of the world, not a harder anarch. An anarch biker gang would stroll into a bar for a good time with drinks, banter, and maybe a small bar brawl. A Sabbat biker gang would stroll into a bar, pray to Cain and whoever else they pray to whilst they are in the toilets, and then proceed to kill everyone in the bar and create a fucking huge bloodbath in the process. Sabbat games have a different feeling to any other Camarilla or Anarch game. We are more used to the aristocratic interview with a vampire vibe, all pretending to be Louis. This is more akin to Near Dark in terms of visceral violence. Sabbat games don't give player backgrounds. Why? Because you were stolen out of your lives. You don't get shit. You are not even a Sabbat member until you have proved yourself. You don't get freedom by default. You have to earn it. They, for the most part, do not have the luxury to be picky about who they embrace. They lack the territory, and the end of the world is nigh. Those that lack titles are merely soldiers in an eternally nocturnal war. The Sabbat adopt the hard and fast method, and the best will rise, giving you the doctrine that the Cam are bad, fuck the elders, etc, etc. They are a cultic sect of war, a war against the Camarilla, a war against the antediluvians, a war against the infernal, and a war against those who don't agree with their martial spiritualism. To that end, one does not choose a path of enlightenment, you are chosen to walk a path. I want to reiterate two things before we conclude the episode. First of all, everything I've just presented to you is my own opinion. At the end of the day, you can do whatever the fuck you want. As long as everyone is having fun and feeling that political horror, then you're doing the Sabbat right, and that's all okay. The other thing I wish to reinforce is that I've only presented a mere portion of my knowledge and takes on tonight's topic. Why would I give you all of my secrets? That's a trick question, I fucking wouldn't. I can reveal, however, that all my knowledge comes from the book, so go and read them if you want to learn more. Again, it is not needed to enjoy the game, but if you want to develop your character concept within the grander lore, go and legally purchase the books and read them and have a jolly good time doing it as well. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.